I'm back with the next installment for top 5 greatest players in each NBA team's history. Now we're at the Los Angeles Clippers. And this is one of those examples of a team that does not have a storied history. For some teams on this list, they have a storied history. You actually got to take time to put it together. Got to put together a few honorable mentions. Some other lists, it's easy to put together because they don't have a great history. And the Los Angeles Clippers fit into that category. Now, the only interesting thing about it was I had to decide because for this series, what I decided to do was to make it more challenging. I can only use a certain player one time. So, like LeBron James, I can only use him one time. I used him for my greatest Cavs of all time. That'll make my greatest Heat list a little more interesting with that big X factor for that list. And that's where it came in handy with Chris Paul. I decided, do I put him with the Pelicans/Hornets since they moved to New Orleans, or do I put him on the Clippers? You'll find out the answer to that throughout this. But that being said, let's dive right into it. This isn't going to be that long. Let's just start with a few honorable mentions. You had Lou Williams, former Sixth Man of the Year. Now, Lou Williams is considered one of those all-time great six men. Now, he traveled, played for a lot of different teams, but out of all the teams he played for, I had a spot to at least give him an honorable mention on the Clippers. You know, he was always a good six man, and the Clippers utilized him. Or in that time period, he was a solid player. I just figured out of all the best spot to put him was the Clippers because they don't have a storied history. So that's why there. Now you also had another one was Chris Kaman. He was drafted in the 2003 draft. He's a decent center. Nothing great, but he did make an all-star appearance during his tenure. And is one of the better Clippers players in their franchise's history. At least worthy of a mention by default. Now we get into the top 5. Starting with number 5, DeAndre Jordan. Now DeAndre Jordan was a good center during his peak for the Clippers. He didn't have a lot of all-star nods, but that's because he wasn't the most popular. But he was part of that big three, part of the Lob City team, alongside Blake Griffin and CP3. He could just lob it up to Blake Griffin. DeAndre Jordan was a menace in the mid-2010s for the Clippers. And he certainly had that. His peak was kind of short with the Clippers, but it was awesome while it lasted. He was part of that big three. He could bulldoze people in the paint. Certainly something the Clippers have not had a lot of in their franchise history, but DeAndre Jordan was one of those guys. Now, moving on to number 4, we got Danny Manning. He was taken in the late 80s. Now, he did lead the Clippers to 2 playoff appearances during his run. He typically averaged over 20 points with the Clippers. He's a power forward, one of the better players in Clippers franchise history. And even post-Clippers, he did win a Sixth Man of the Year with the Suns in the late 90s, but that's not about that. It's about his tenure with the Clippers. He is by one of the better Clippers players in history because they haven't really had a lot of great players, but Danny Manning, while he wasn't a great player, he was a good player and one of the bright spots for that team. And now you move on to number 3. We're going to go with Elton Brand. He was with them throughout most of the 2000s. After he got traded from the Chicago Bulls who initially drafted him. Now Brand, during his tenure with the Clippers, didn't have a lot of great teammates. He only made 2 all-star appearances, but that's because he wasn't the most popular player and he was in a loaded West with all-star voting. So that did hinder his all-star votes and number of appearances, but he typically averaged 2+ blocks a game for them, averaged close to 20 in some seasons, played most of the games for them. He was a good rebounder, at least averaging about 5 rebounds per game through his tenure with the Clippers. Like I said, it's a shame he didn't have much of a team around him, but he was one of the better players, and he at least gave the Clippers a little bit of something, at least made them competitive, and he is remembered as one of those better players. It's a shame the Clippers front office didn't put better pieces around him, more I think about, because he honestly is an underrated player solely for the fact that majority of his career, he did not play with a lot of good teams. And Elton Brand was kind of a victim of his environment. If he had better teams, he would have probably gotten more recognition for how good he was in the 2000s. But he was a good player and one of the better Clippers. Now moving on to number 2, I'm going to go with Blake Griffin. He was a 6-time All-Star. He was, exciting to watch. Part of that Lob City team. You remember that 2011 slam dunk contest? He jumped over a car. I mean, his amazing agility at that height as a power forward was phenomenal. And Blake Griffin was certainly a fun player to watch. Easily part of the most exciting era in Clippers franchise history. And hey, he was for a period, after years of the Clippers being an abomination, he helped give them some hope. And certainly, while they only got to the second round, they never got past that under his watch. He did bring, he was good for the time he was, and it was fun to watch. And easily one of the better Clippers, one of the few guys that consistently played a role in them getting to the playoffs. Now moving on to number 1. I decided to go with Chris Paul here instead of the Pelicans/Hornets, which was a tough decision because I could have went both ways, but I went with him here because look what happened as soon as he got to the Clippers in 2011. After the original trade to send him to the Lakers was vetoed by David Stern, he did end up getting traded to the Clippers, and immediately that team improved. With him and Blake Griffin, then eventually DeAndre Jordan, immediately that team was in playoff contention. They went from laughingstock to a team that was at least in the mix every year with Chris Paul there. He was that instant it factor they had on both sides, on offensive side of the ball. It easily made that Clippers team better and led them to the best period in their franchise's history after years of being a disaster. Chris Paul was that it factor, and that's why he's considered one of the top 5 point guards of all time. And because of just how his immediate impact on the Clippers and improving them, that's why I went with him for the Clippers, A, out of all the teams he's played for, and B, as the greatest Clipper of all time, just for that. So that's my list of top 5 greatest Los Angeles Clippers of all time. Kind of easy list to put together. They don't have a storied history, but I did find 5 players and a few honorable mentions that at least provided good to an otherwise disappointing Clippers team. Now, some people will point to, what about Kawhi and Paul George? I used Paul George as an honorable mention for the Pacers. I'm going to use Kawhi for a different team, so stay tuned for that. Like I said, I'm only using each player once. That's the reason these guys didn't appear on this list. But if you guys want to comment, give me your list in the comments. You're more than welcome to. Also, make sure to drop a like and subscribe for more NBA-related content. And until next time, your boy Nicky Steez signing off.